Tai gerai, pradedame tada mūsų sesiją, kadangi matau, kad kol kas visi lietuviai, tai aš kreipiuosi jūs lietuviškai ir tada noriu pristatyti pirmą mūsų atstovą šitos sesijos, tai būtent Vytautą Rubavičių. Aš norėjau jį paprovokuoti, paklausti, nuo kada jis domisi Čiurlioniu.
Na, netoliese, bet nebuvo taip toks jau aktualus ir ta aktualybė tapo tokia susijusi su Antano Andrijausko veikla ir jo vis paraginimais ir per pastarosius gal 2-3 metų nukrypimas, gal per 5 metus nukrypimas į amerindišką perspektyvizmą, kurį aš manau ir iki šiol ir dabar manau, kad jį galima veiksmingai pritaikyti netiesiogiai, bet atsižvelgiant į civilizacinius skirtumus, pritaikyti ir mūsų gyvenime ir ypač, staiga man pasirodė Čiurlionio kai kurie dalykai, kurie kreipia į tą praamžę, sakyčiau, šamanišką į pasaulėvaizdį ir šamanišką patirtį, kuri gyvybinga ir mūsų laikais, bet ji šiaip gyvybinga ir tuose apmąstymuose integralinio, kas yra susijęs su integraliniais visais dalykais, integralinės sąmonės, perkeistos sąmonės lygmi ir kitais dalykais. Tai...
Kad galite angliškai kalbėti.
Gerai. Let's begin. My rather convoluted reflections were reinforced and elevated in their own way by an unexpected image written by Čiurlionis, citation, and on whose banks above the beloved Nemunas the sky is so clear, so gentle, so Lithuanian. You look and cannot look away. Then your heart begins to beat faster and your soul rejoices and begins to sing a hymn to the one who gave you your homeland, Lithuania. And how beautiful our Lithuania is. This statement reveals a fundamental feature of Čiurlionis' worldview and understanding of the world. Lithuania as the greatest gift. The gift of the Supreme Being is sacred. So it is sung about incessantly. Such singing is a ritual and thanksgiving and, at the same time, worship of the power of the Supreme Being. The sacredness of Lithuania is an existential feeling of Čiurlionis. The abode of the Supreme Being is usually associated with the sky. And what is Čiurlionis' sky like? Lithuanian. The gift is the Lithuanian world with its sacred power of giving. Čiurlionis' song is his work through which singing spreads. The singing is complete, giving rise of all forms of artistic creation, visual, auditory, and linguistic. Since singing or chanting is the repetition of the primary rhythm or ritual rhythms supported by eternity, rhythmic structures are characteristic of all areas of his artistic expression. And beauty here is not just an aesthetic category, but an ontological one. Of particular significance is Čiurlionis' turn to Lithuanian identity, which is already manifested in Lithuanian existential chanting and Lithuanian worship of the Supreme Being. This turn or sense of profound awakening, like the discovery of new self, opens up a new, already Lithuanian worldview, or perhaps revives the obscured, suppressed one, which shines with an incredible power of self-transformation, a soul-lifting primordial song. In this respect, the gift is not nature or landscape. We use such words when trying to describe Čiurlionis' paintings. The Supreme Being does not belittle. He gives the whole world, reviving the awareness of the original worldview in human consciousness. The opening speaks in images and strengthens the innate ability to discern the light of a primal image and, so to speak, its structure in the environment. Čiurlionis grew up in a Christian environment and absorbed the stories of the Old and New Testament from childhood. In this regard, the question of faith is irrelevant. The essential and obvious fact is that from early childhood he participated in Catholic liturgy with his organist father. He was well acquainted with the rites, the path of suffering of Jesus Christ, and the gift of eternal life given to humanity through his sacrifice. The Holy Scriptures we also read at home. In his consciousness, organ hymns particularly reinforces the stories used in the liturgy. Church organ music later became associated with the architecture of the world in many paintings. The structure of the organ pipes is significant, as if confirming the insight that architecture is frozen organ music. The architecture of the organ is marked in the cycle of the creation of the world. The viewpoint in Raigardas is from the church tower, and such architectural elements are also present in Snake Sonata. Even the trees are reminiscent of organ pipes in some places, shining like columns of buildings. The obvious reference to Christian snake symbolism is more difficult to interpret, as it reveals a primary pre-Christian dimension that still survives in various fragments in our times. By the way, in Christianity itself, the image of the serpent is contradictory because it must negate its original meaning, but it does it so in a way that reinforces it. This contradiction is evident in both Old and New Testaments. The original serpent is associated with the primordial waters from which the world was created. The primordial waters are divided into lower and upper ones, as if into two powers whose union gives life. These powers are much older, of pre-Christian origin, symbolized in dual world civilizations and beliefs. The lower waters also indicate the underground waters associated with the realm of the dead. Thus, the serpent also represents the ancestors, or in other words, the first humans and the eternity associated with them. It also interacts with the first humans in the Christian imagination. It tempts Eve to taste the fruit of knowledge. What does Eve sin led to? It awakens the fertility hidden within her. And how does the serpent behave in the Lithuanian tale Spruce Egle, the queen of serpents? He forces naked Spruce Egle to agree to marry him, thus becoming impregnated. Tempted, Adam and Eve in paradise cover themselves with clothes. In other words, they enter the world of culture. Egle's clothes are returned to her, and she is allowed to return to the world of culture. However, this is only temporary until she leaves for another world in the lake, because she has already promised to return to her original fertility. Nita Gaidauskienė has pointed out that the tale was well known to the Čiurlionis family. Much could be said about how Lithuanians have worshipped snakes in ancient times, keeping them in their homes as sacred animals. I will quote an excerpt from a letter written by King Sigismund Augustus to Bishop Macijauskas, found on the internet. Citation: beyond Vilnius, specifically in Samogitia, uneducated and naive people worship as gods forests, oaks, lindens, stones, and finally snakes, bringing them gifts and burning sacrifices in public and in private. This quote refers to a more general Lithuanian worldview and perception of the world, which we will later link to Amerindian perspectivism. My reflections revolve around one of the 10 paintings in the cycle Fantasies, entitled Praregėjimas, Enlightenment or Epiphany. Which depicts a snake wrapped around a T-shaped cross rising above the waters. The light rising from the waters slightly illuminates the dark waters. It should be noted that the title of this painting contrasts with the title of the cycle in its own way. It refers to the essential existential experience of conversion or awakening, and is therefore much more charged than fantasies. The difference is important for two reasons. First of all, Enlightenment is an extremely important concept in the Holy Scriptures, referring to an insight into the essence of the world, the structure of the world, and the higher spiritual powers operating in it, when it is granted as a blessing from this power, which is granted as a blessing from these powers. At the same time, revelation is a manifestation. The essence of the world is revealed through a certain image and the knowledge associated with it. In the Holy Scriptures, these concepts are accompanied by impressive images. One needs to recall the visions and revelations of Saints Paul and John. Another thing is that Čiurlionis was very interested in psychology, studied the works of psychologists, and delved into his own psychological states. The title indicates that this painting is the most important, while the others are lighter, more imaginative. It also gives symbolic meaning to the cycle of the creation of the world. The painting clearly refers to the passages from the Old Testament's book of Numbers, discussed by many interpreters, in which the Almighty tells Moses how to save the Israelites from his punishment. Čiurlionis, by the way, painted both Moses and Christ's portraits. The Old Testament book of Numbers recounts, "Then the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the Israelites died." Seeing such a terrible punishment, Moses asks the Almighty to soften his heart and asks for advice. Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Everyone who is bitten will look at it and live. True translations vary. The serpent is also translated as a snake, and the wildfire is translated elsewhere as copper. However, the most important thing is that Moses raises an artificial snake attached to a staff or a pole and heals people with it. This symbol connects death and life. Death is healed by the image of death. At the same time, snakes were still believed to possess the primordial divine power to control life and death, and the scene itself refers to much older primal ritual ceremonies. This image is so important that it has survived for centuries and is repeated in the Gospel of John in connection with the Redeemer. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, and whoever believes in him may have eternal life. Čiurlionis writes that the serpent hung on the cross above the vast waters, illuminated by the rising or setting sun. The image of the waters refers to the primordial waters of the creation of the world. And as we know, Christ was born, citation, before the creation of the world. This painting can be seen as the conceptual core of Čiurlionis' creative vision of the creation of the world, which manifested itself during his ecstatic revelations. Such revelations provide absolute knowledge about the world process in which we all are involved. Such knowledge is preserved and nurtured in shamanic worldviews. We will discuss such a worldview a little later, referring to studies of Amerindian perspectivism. But now, let us consider a few more things related to the image of the snake. Some time ago, while visiting Stelmužės oak, I heard a story about a custom that existed in those lands. The oak itself was undoubtedly a sacred oak, around which certain rituals have been performed since ancient times. The hill is associated with the mountain of the world, and the spring at its foot is associated with the underground waters, and thus with the kingdom of the ancestors. The ancestors, incidentally, were responsible for all kinds of fertility and thus for the survival of the community. It was believed, or perhaps even known, that snakes connected to the other world lived in that spring, capable of granting the wishes of those who came to them and helping them predict the future. In return, they had to be paid by throwing a copper coin into the spring. In the painting Funeral Symphony, the crowd of people winding their way away like snake. In Čiurlionis painting from the snake sonata, the snake's ribbons connected to the sky with the waters. The crescent moon is depicted next to its tail. Moon is important. Since ancient times, the moon and the snake have been clearly associated with and symbolized as the rulers of the force, of life force. The mythology of the Middle East is eloquent in this regard. A woman's waters breaking before giving birth are associated with the primordial waters of the creation of the world. And the moon sends the soul of the child in the boat crescent, which brings the child into this world. Such a boat was also depicted on the Christian cross. The connection between the snake and the crescent moon is primordial. In Vilnius Cathedral hangs one icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary, known as Sapieginė or Švento Mikalojaus. Many people do not notice what Mary is standing on. She is standing on a crescent moon boat. It is unclear whether the painter was aware of this symbolism, but the primordial connection, the vitality that transcends the rise of Christianity thousands of years ago is obvious. In the painting Star Sonata Andante, there are heavenly snakeskin winding stripes. The approach of Amerindian perspectivism encourages us to see in this type of work the light of the archetypes that are characteristic of humanity and sustains its vitality, as well as deep symbolism connections, deep symbolic connections that emerge in it, pointing to a primal planetary spirituality and consciousness. In my opinion, this approach drew attention to the primary characteristics of all civilizations, which have been preserved in the folk beliefs of almost all nations to this day, in various symbolic fragments which can be called shamanistic or shamanic, and the worldview it supports, as well as the ritualistic way of life necessary to maintain such a world order. This worldview still survives among the tribes of Amazon rainforest, where the essential features of Amerindian worldview and world perception have been preserved, despite the recent arrival of modern capitalist scientific civilization and Christian missionaries. The life of the Amazonian tribes, their ability to communicate with animals and plants, the forces of nature, even though they do not have a general understanding of nature as great object, became the subject of interest a good 3 decades ago with the publications of seminal works of Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, Philippe Descola, and several other scholars. We will highlight the essential features of the Amerindian worldview, which point to a striking difference between two ontologies, Amerindian and Western. In Amerindian ontology, there is no opposition between nature and culture. In the evolution of the world, it is not culture that separates or distinguishes itself from nature, but nature that at a certain point in prehistory begins to differ from culture, while maintaining strong connections and the possibility of return. The primary stage is that of created or born humans, and later animals and beasts emerge from that human state. So beasts are also considered like human beings. From an Amerindian perspective, the essential feature of the state of the world today is not the animality that remains in humans, because Western civilized people are convinced that they originated from animals, but rather the humanity that has been retained by beasts and other animals. Many species of animals and other objects of nature possess a set of human spiritual traits that allows humans to interact with them as if they were people. In Western ontology, human culture has overcome animal nature, while in Amerindian culture, socio-cultural human nature takes on animal and other forms. Humans and animals are characterized by personhood, which is called the soul. Each animal species has a characteristic and generalized spirit that is embodied in the body of a shaman, who can change his form, become an animal, and more importantly, take on the animal's perspective. For example, when looking at the world through the eyes of a jaguar, a shaman sees people as potential prey. The theoretical view that it is possible to shift from one perspective to another, to change one's point of view through certain practices that allow communication with non-human communities, is referred to as ontological perspectivism. The perspectives of human and non-humans, animal spirits, dead plants, even some objects, on each other and themselves differ. Humans see everything as it is, humans as humans and animals as animals. If they are spirits, it is only in an abnormal state. However, animals and spirits see people as animals and themselves as people. They perceive themselves as living in a cultural state. Only the eyes of a shaman can see the humanity hidden behind the external non-human form, the soul of the animal, plant, or spirit. Intentionality is also characteristic of universal human consciousness. Summarizing, the ontological and anthropological differences between the West and the Amerindians in terms of their perception of nature and culture and their opposition, the following Western and Amerindian ontological features can be distinguished. The West is characterized by a multicultural ontology, from an understanding of the unity of nature to the premise of the material substrate. It moves toward multiple cultural meanings, while in the America's multicultural ontology prevails. From spiritual unity and the spiritual human substrate, it moves toward multiple forms of nature, lacking an understanding of matter and nature as a universal substrate. Here, culture, the subject, is universal, while nature is multiple and not bound by materiality. This is a shamanic perception of the world, in which the activities of the shaman are recognized and revered as exceptional. What could be the shamanic feature of Čiurlionis' worldview and creativity? First of all, it is related to the perception and revelation of primal images. Another thing is the interaction of the senses, the expression of an experience called synesthesia, which is characteristic of shamans. Sounds and images merge into one another, taking on the form of ritual songs, whose notes are, so to speak, recorded in images of nature and tribal ornaments. Amazonian tribes worship the great creator Mother Anaconda, who is identified with the Amazon River and the Milky Way. Thus, snakes or anacondas participate in human life in many ways. They accompany people into this world and send them off to the next. It is believed that the original song of the creation of the world is recorded in the patterns of the snake anaconda's skin. So shamans sing it while performing various rituals, especially healing rituals. It should be noted that contemporary Native American artists, especially textile artists, Shipibo from Shipibo tribes, make extensive use of anaconda ornamentation in their work, which they also incorporate into musical installations. Incidentally, Čiurlionis' explanations of his creative sensations point to a certain ritualistic nature of creation. One can assume that the creative act is considered a ritual, which reinforces the premonition of revelation or the sound images caused by its light. Creativity healing the world, maybe. I will have this question for further considerations later. For now, I will try to explain the Lithuanian universality of Čiurlionis' creativity. Why is he understood by artists and researchers in many countries? Because we all live supported by certain common structures of archetypes and symbolic connections which can be discerned and unfold in Čiurlionis' Lithuanian work. Lithuanianness and Lithuanian identity are universal because of their exceptional ability to bring forth the light of archetypes, because it precisely that light that highlights the uniqueness of Lithuanity. In other words, the center of the world can be seen from any location, but once seen, that location becomes unique, illuminated by the light of the center, and thus connected to all other locations through that light. It should be noted that the unusual strangeness and at the same time attractive and captivating power of Čiurlionis' paintings, which transcend cultural boundaries, was well felt by his contemporaries and interpreted in various ways, highlighting its uniqueness. I will quote Antanas Smetona, father of our statehood, who was dedicated to promoting Lithuanian culture in the Vilnius region at that time, and insightfully interpreted various social phenomena and events from his 1910 review of an art exhibition site. And Čiurlionis, whom our compatriots understood so little, is clearer to us in this year. His imagination, bold and grand, amazes everyone. Jau viskas tikriausiai. Ar dar? Conclusion, okay. Conclusion. Yes, in conclusion, I must admit that at first it seemed too bold to me to Amazonize or shamanize Čiurlionis. But unexpectedly, Antanas Andrijauskas gave me a sign that I understood as a kind of permission. It was a reference to a letter dated 1904 to his brother Povilas, in which he talks about possible trips, including visiting, citation, inaccessible Amazon forests. The world of the Amazon seems very distant from the Lithuanian countryside at the beginning of 20th century. However, the image of the Amazon was already widespread in Europe's scientific literature and the media. I dare to link this to the descriptions of Alexander von Humboldt's scientific activities and their dissemination. It is Thank you, colleagues.